What if everything you know about ancient humans is wrong? Not a little wrong. Fundamentally, completely, embarrassingly wrong. Because the picture most people have, the serious, survival-focused, grunting and hunting primitive human, is missing one huge detail. They were getting high regularly, on purpose, across every continent, across hundreds of thousands of years. And the evidence is not hidden. It has been sitting in plain sight in museums and archaeological reports and ancient texts for decades. We just did not want to talk about it. Let's start with the oldest direct evidence ever found. In 2019, in a remote mountain region of western China, the Pamir Plateau, archaeologists digging in an ancient cemetery discovered wooden braziers, small bowls made especially for burning substances. Inside the residue, THC, the psychoactive compound in cannabis. The dating results came back, 2,500 years old. But here is the part that completely rewrites the story. The THC level in those ancient samples is much higher than wild cannabis plants naturally make, which means these were not people who accidentally walked into a cannabis field. They were purposely growing high-potency strains. 2,500 years ago in the mountains of western China, someone was selectively breeding cannabis to make it stronger. These were not primitive experimenters. These were skilled pharmacologists. But cannabis is only the beginning. Let's go to North Africa 9,000 years ago. The Tassili Nadjer Plateau in Algeria, one of the most amazing collections of prehistoric cave art ever discovered. Among thousands of figures painted on cave walls, animals, humans, hunting scenes, researchers found something that made them stop completely. Mushrooms painted with impossible detail, growing from the bodies of human figures and held in human hands. Shown with the kind of careful attention that ancient artists saved for things that mattered. Ethnobotanist Giorgio Samarini spent years studying these images and concluded that the mushrooms shown are almost certainly psilocybe species. Magic mushrooms painted on cave walls 9,000 years ago by people who clearly thought they were important enough to make them last forever in rock. Not as food, not as medicine, as something sacred. Here is where the science gets truly mind-bending. In 1992, ethnobotanist Terence McKenna suggested what became known as the Stoned Ape Hypothesis. The theory is this. As ancient human ancestors followed moving herds across the African savanna, they often came across dung piles from large animals. Dung is where psilocybin mushrooms naturally grow. McKenna suggested that early hominids who ate these mushrooms and experienced better visual sharpness, pattern recognition, and brain stimulation gained thinking advantages over those who did not. Sharper vision to spot predators. Better pattern recognition for tracking. Brain stimulation that helped synaptic growth and neural connection. Over thousands of generations, the individuals who used psychedelics developed more complex brains. The stone ape. Hypothesis suggests that psychedelic plants did not just appear alongside human mental evolution. They may have sped it up. Now, let's talk about the Greeks, because this is the detail that breaks everything open. For centuries, scholars have known about the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most sacred religious ceremony in ancient Greece, held every year for nearly 2,000 years, attended by Plato, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, Cicero. The ceremony centered around a drink called the kykeon. People described drinking it and having visions, meetings with the divine, changes in consciousness so deep that they described it as dying and being born again. For centuries, historians thought this was metaphor, a poetic way to describe an emotional religious experience. Then, in 2020, researchers studying residue from an ancient Greek drinking vessel found it. Ergot-alkaloids, the same kinds of compounds connected to LSD, mixed with beer and cannabis. The most sacred religious ceremony in the Western world's most celebrated civilization was built around a psychedelic drink. Plato wrote the foundations of Western philosophy while processing what he experienced in that ceremony. The birth of Western thought may have happened inside a psychedelic trip. Let's go to the Americas because here the evidence is the oldest anywhere on Earth. In 2019, archaeologists in southwestern Texas studied residue from ancient ritual pouches found in a cave. Inside, peyote. The pouch dates back 5,700 years. Peyote contains mescaline, one of the strongest naturally occurring psychedelics known to science. And it was not hidden. It was not shameful. It was a ritual object, carefully prepared, purposely stored, passed down. Across North and South America, indigenous traditions involving psychedelic plants stretch back thousands of years. Ayahuasca in the Amazon, peyote across North America, San Pedro cactus in the Andes. Every tradition treats these plants the same way, not as recreational drugs, as teachers, as doorways, as the most direct path to the sacred. Here is the question that science is now seriously asking. What if these plants were not just cultural practices? What if they were tools? A 2016 study from Johns Hopkins found that one psilocybin experience caused lasting increases in openness, creativity, and mental flexibility in more than 60% of participants. Changes that lasted not for days, for years. Neuroscientist Robin Carhart-Harris at Imperial College London found that psychedelics temporarily reduced the stiffness of the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for habitual thinking, self-focused loops, and the fixed stories we build about who we are. In plain language, they reset the brain, allow new connections, new perspectives, new ways of seeing problems that familiarity had made invisible. Ancient humans used these plants in ritual and ceremony, experiences carefully designed to be understood together, guided by experienced practitioners, integrated over time. They were not escaping reality. They were trying to see it more clearly. Here is where I leave you. For most of human history, across most of the world, changing consciousness was not a crime. It was not a crisis. It was a technology, one that indigenous cultures developed, improved, and protected across thousands of years because it worked for healing trauma, for building social unity, for facing mortality, for reaching states of insight that ordinary consciousness could not reach. Modern science spent decades dismissing all of it and is now quietly in peer-reviewed journals confirming most of it. Ancient humans were not escaping their world when they got high. They were trying to understand it. And the plants they used to do that have been growing on this planet for millions of years, long before we arrived.